Welcome back. I'm gonna clear up any confusion over the jersey I'm wearing right at the start. I got myself Cool Hockey had a deal on jerseys right around Christmas. It took months for this to arrive, but this is for when I play street hockey, which is about a month away. Once the power rankings are all done, the regular season's done, I have time to have street hockey meetups. And for street hockey, I don't take anything out of the collection because I don't want anything to get scratched up or anything like that. So I make sure that I have jerseys for that, so I don't have to worry about that. I had a scare early on one of the first meetups, might have been the second meetup, and so, yeah, no more of that. All right, so I just want to explain that because people see the captain. Always get a jersey. If you're going to put your name on it, put the captain C or the A on it because it's an extra letter for no extra money. All right, so 1 through 32, that's explained, right? And it means Calgary had a decent week, although their playoff chances still remain remote. So, starting off at number 32, and same spot as last week is San Jose. The Sharks are still the only team in the league not yet at 20 wins. They are still at 19 wins and counting. And their struggles are pretty well documented. They were number 32 last week as well, dropping from 29. This week they stay at 32, so I haven't seen anything in their play this week to tell me they're going to move up. But at least they're losing an extra time, so I get to watch extra San Jose hockey when they're 32. And the best thing is, number 31 on the board is one of the teams they played this week. And I get extra hockey between Columbus and San Jose. So that team drops 4 spots this week. So Columbus coming into this week, I had seen a couple of comments here and there about why does he have Columbus so high when they're 27th? And the reality is they were playing well. This road trip has kind of submarined that. We'll see if they win more games before the end of the year. But the reality is one of these two teams is very likely going to have the best chance at the end of the year to draft the number 1 spot. And so it could very well be Columbus with that 25% chance. It could be San Jose. We shall find out in about 4 weeks' time. All right, number 30 on the board is Anaheim. So Anaheim drops 2 spots from last week. They haven't been 20 all year, but they're 30, and so we've got 2 California teams in the bottom 3. The LA Kings are not in the bottom row. They're not in this row. They're not even in this row. The LA Kings are up here. But for Anaheim, those are dreams that are in the distant future. Not a great week for Anaheim. Again, a lot of movement this week. There are only 2 teams that stay in the same spot as they were last week. Or is it 3? I think it's 3. 3 teams stay in the same spot as last week. A lot of movement. And once we get to the top row, I have some things to talk about. So, yeah, number 30 on the board is Anaheim. Not a lot else to say other than they've been playing for next year for a while now. Number 29, moving up 1 spot from last week. So 1 spot is modest improvement, even though Philadelphia has been tough the last couple of days here. They should have won that game against Carolina, but they decided not to, I guess. At any rate, and it really was just blown coverage. There's a 7-second power play, and I think it's one of those things where the guys probably look at the clock and go, it's not enough time. And then there was. So for Philadelphia, they probably would have moved up more if they held on and won that game against Carolina, but they didn't, so they don't. They are 29th this week, but it is a move up 1 spot because Anaheim dropping down. Number 28, moving up 3 spots from last week, Chicago. The Blackhawks playing some good hockey. I thought they played well against Arizona tonight. Arizona's just got something going on at home is what's going on. For Chicago, their record is still mediocre, but they're finding themselves ahead of some of these other teams that they maybe weren't expected to be before the season started. And yeah, they're still finding a way to get points here and there, which might upset some of their fans. Again, once you're at this point in the season, the tanking thing, you would think it's more prominent, but it really isn't. Like, I don't see as many comments as I did, say, a month ago when it comes to why didn't my team lose in regulation? But here we are, Chicago at number 28. Number 27, dropping 1 spot from last week, Montreal. So for the Habs, losing both games in Florida, there's no shame in that. There isn't. But there is some shame in losing 9-5 and being down 7-3 after the first period. They just did not show up. They played much better against Tampa Bay tonight. They had a lead going into the third, And then it was like Tampa Bay remembered, right, we need this game. And I think it's because Tampa Bay is playing like they want to win and get that home ice against Toronto. That being said, Montreal, I thought played a half-decent game tonight, as could be expected considering where these teams are at right now in their situations. Number 26, and dropping 2 spots from last week, Detroit. So Detroit finds themselves in the bottom row. I think this is the first time Detroit's been in the bottom row all year. Once the year's done and I'm done doing power rankings, I like to do videos on, the peaks and valleys for teams and the average power rankings and all that. But yeah, Detroit finds themselves at 26 this week. A lot of losing recently. And I had said when the trade deadline came and went and they had moved as many players as they had, I said, Detroit's record could get ugly from here. And so by the end of the year, we might look at their record compared to the season before and say, well, did they really improve? The reality is yes, but they also sold at the deadline. And today it just felt like Colorado had a book on Husso. They were like, every shot they were going for the exact same spot on the net, and they hit it a few times. So yeah, Detroit drops to 26th. 25th on the board. Moving up 4 spots from last week is Arizona. The Coyotes have a real chance right now of moving out of the bottom row. The Coyotes are winning games. They're playing well. They won that game against Vancouver. Tonight they beat Chicago. These are teams that are below the playoff line too, but they've won 20 home games. So if they can figure out next season how to win on the road, Arizona's going to be a heck of a lot better than we give them credit for. And keep in mind, there's a lot of their money, when you look at the cap situation, that's not being used on players that they're playing. So Arizona absolutely is a team that if they didn't have that dead money and if they were spending it on real players, they might at the very least be in a much better position. They still wouldn't be a playoff team, but they might be in around where Calgary and Nashville are. So yeah, Arizona might be a team to watch next year. Keep in mind, we've seen this with Arizona in second halves of seasons before. It can be fool's gold. All right, number 24, dropping 3 spots from last week. Rough week for them overall, and that's Washington. So the Caps are not in the bottom row, but they could be next week if things keep going the way they're going with Arizona and if Washington continues to lose games. For the Caps, they're still in the hunt for a playoff spot, technically, but it does feel like it's slipping away, especially with Florida getting the win, the Islanders getting the win today. Pittsburgh, it feels like it's probably a little bit out of reach for them as well. So, and they sold at the deadline too, so that absolutely hurts their ability to stay in the hunt. For the Caps, they're 24th on the board. We'll see if they end up in the bottom row next week. Number 23, and moving up 2 spots from last week, St. Louis. So the Blues are out of the bottom row, playing some solid hockey. Kyrou was good this week. Thomas had a decent week as well. And amongst the ugliness of that game against Minnesota, then Hofer comes up, and Hofer had a good game. So there's some reasons to look at this week and say, you know what, there were some positives for St. Louis, and I think Hofer having a really good game is absolutely a net positive. It's exactly that, net positive. Goaltender, net, it doesn't matter. It's Saturday. I'm probably pretty tired. Don't pay attention to that part of it. But yeah, St. Louis, they move out of the bottom row. It's pretty easy to move up, though, with some of these teams because their records aren't necessarily that great. Number 22, a team whose record is really not great, Buffalo. I feel bad. I do. When I did my predictions for this year, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Buffalo makes the playoffs. And if things had fallen differently with them at home, they would have. Or at the very least, they'd still be right there. They'd be a point or 2 out. They lose games that they need, and then, they win enough that they're staying in the hunt technically, but not really. So, yeah, Buffalo ends up at 22 this week. I feel bad. I don't feel responsible that my prediction made them miss the playoffs, but there will certainly be that out there. That's certainly been said before, right? Dallas had a rough week after I did a video talking about how Dallas been playing pretty well. So these things happen. But at any rate, Buffalo's 22 this week. Number 21, and moving up a couple of spots from last week. Which puck am I going to use? I'll use this one. Vancouver. Yep, the Vancouver Canucks have moved all the way up to 21st. Now, the game tonight against the Kings, they had no business being in that game at all. But Thatcher Demko's good. And Thatcher Demko, who had a save percentage, I think it was .881 before the injury. And now, even with those stats, his save percentage is above .900. Demko's back. And suddenly when Demko's back, Vancouver wins a game tonight against LA. They had no business winning. Those things are related. So for Vancouver, it looks good for next year. It does. It looks like they're going to be a team that's in the mix for the playoffs, which will drive fans crazy if they don't make it. But that is what management signaled that they want to do. They want to aim for playoffs next season. That's why they had Hronek, even though Hronek's hurt. The idea is that Hronek then, towards the end of this season, makes his debut with the Canucks, or maybe next season he comes in and makes his debut for the Canucks, and that solidifies that blue line, and they'll be good, despite the fact that they'd be above the cap and all that. But either way, they've been playing well lately, and they've moved up. Number 20, dropping 2 spots from last week, Ottawa. It's not that long ago that Ottawa was knocking on the door of a playoff spot. It is not that long ago that Ottawa was right near that top 2 rows. And I remember it wasn't that long ago either that I said Ottawa's playoff hopes are slim, and there were Sens fans that took umbrage with that. They weren't happy. But that road trip lingered out there, and it loomed because their road record is not that good. And I mean, they showed some heart tonight against Toronto, but their playoff chances have basically been stomped out at this point. So it's about getting the positives. The positives being that Ottawa was in the hunt later than usual. Same positive you can get if you're a Buffalo fan right now. Same for Detroit. And the future's really bright for all 3 teams, right? So there's that. Number 19. And staying in the same spot as last week, Nashville. Nashville's frustrating. And I say that I'm not even a Nashville fan, but they're frustrating to watch. Because one night you watch them and you go, you know what? These guys want to be in the playoffs. They're playing really well. Things are going, this is great. And then the next game, they're listless. And you're like, wait, I thought you guys wanted to be in the playoffs. And, you look at the game against Chicago. If they'd played the game against Chicago like they did against Winnipeg, they would have beaten Chicago. But they didn't. And then with Winnipeg, they gave them everything they could handle for large portions of that game. And it's just, they're really kind of all over the place. So they stay in the same spot. They lose games they should win. They're in games that you would think they're going to lose. And so they still end up outside the top 16. They're not likely to make the playoffs. Number 18 on the board, moving up 4 spots from last week. So one of the biggest movers this week, Calgary. So for the Flames, they have the setback against Dallas in overtime tonight, because both Calgary and Dallas struggle to win in overtime, right? But for Calgary, they're just not getting enough games with 2 points, right? Something I've said all year, the 15 overtime and shootout loss points give them 15 more points in the standings, but it also means they've lost 15 points in those games where they could have won. So for Calgary, even if they'd won, say, half of those, if you had an extra 8 points for Calgary, they're comfortably above the line. So it's another loss, and just looking at how dejected that team looks when they lose a game like tonight, it's tough. And I say that as somebody who was cheering for Dallas in that game. Even though I thought from the way that game unfolded, I was really surprised Dallas won it, because I felt like Calgary probably deserved it, but here we are. Number 17. And dropping 2 spots from last week, Pittsburgh. So the Penguins find themselves outside of the top 16, even though they are in the top 16 in the East. But man, those losses against the Rangers, those hurt. They end up finding themselves now just 1 point ahead of the Florida Panthers for that final playoff spot. 1 point. And with the Islanders getting a win tonight as well, and the Islanders winning enough on that road trip, not as many as I think they'd like to, but they win enough, the Penguins are in some peril here. They could find themselves outside of the playoffs, and they kind of went all in at the deadline. Now, does that mean that Ron Hextall would end up out? It could. We could see a situation where if Pittsburgh, after what they did at the trade deadline, actually missed the playoffs, we could see a change at the top. We could see a change with who's coaching behind the bench. There could be a lot of changes with the Penguins, because when you've got Sidney Crosby, you've got Malkin, you've got Letang, and due to their age, due to their contracts and the cost of all this, you have to have a team that's at least competing for the Stanley Cup. That has to be a playoff team. So in the event that Pittsburgh does fall out, I think there will be fallout from that. Number 16. So we're into the top 2 rows now. Number 16, same as last week, the Islanders. The Islanders don't move up. They don't move down. A win over San Jose won't move the needle. Winning a game against Anaheim won't move the needle either. And basically at this point, the Islanders, it looks like, should get in the playoffs. I think in their last 21 games, like they're 13-5-3. I think they were 12-5-3 in their last 20 coming in, so now they'd be 13-5-3. Just doing the math in my head. Yeah, that's 21 games. So that's good enough, right? And that should keep them above teams that are, trying to approach from beneath them in the standings. And of course, as I've mentioned, Detroit's fallen off, Ottawa's fallen off, Buffalo's fallen off. This all adds up to the Islanders should make the playoffs, right? That being said, Pittsburgh from here, their record their schedule should get them in. But again, just because you should get in doesn't mean you shouldn't. Once we get up to this top row, I can really get into what I'm talking about here. Because the teams at the top aren't necessarily playing like the teams at the top, which frustrates me. So number 15 on the board, dropping 5 spots from last week. Yep, 5. Seattle. Seattle is an interesting team that if you look at their record and you look at their season, and one thing I love to do when the season's over is do the autopsy on every team's season. What happened? Where did it go? Why did it fail? And so for Seattle, they're going to be a playoff team. It's very, very unlikely they fall out of the playoffs. However, if you take out 2 months of their schedule, and I know people are going to say, well, you can't take out 2 months, but the interesting thing is Seattle's remarkably mediocre outside of 2 really strong months this season. And so if they can channel whatever they had going to those really strong 2 months, they could be a tough out in the playoffs. Otherwise, they could be out quickly in the first round. But making the playoffs is huge for Seattle this year. That'd be great to see Seattle fans getting a chance to see playoff hockey up close. There's nothing like playoff hockey in the NHL. I would put it up against any sports playoffs anywhere. The only exception might be the World Cup of soccer. However, that World Cup, there are some really, really boring games in that World Cup. There are some thrillers that are fantastic once you reach the knockout stage, but it can get really boring sometimes before that. So I would put NHL playoff hockey up against the World Cup. I absolutely would. I will say that. Number 14 on the board, moving up 3 spots from last week. 3. Winnipeg. So the Jets have shown some fight lately, and that maybe they want to stay in this playoff hunt. And I think they showed enough this week that maybe. The thing is, they have trouble with their scoring. They have trouble with their it just feels like the mental part of the game has slipped on them the last month. And so the win over Nashville today, I think, symbolically was important. I think they've had some wins because of Hellebuck, looking at those wins in Florida as examples. And then, the tough game against Carolina after that. But Winnipeg is still in the hunt, and they should finish above the playoff line. Should. They absolutely should. That being said, both Calgary and Nashville are still within striking distance, and Nashville has games in hand. So as I said in the recap video for the Nashville-Winnipeg game, when TSN's announcers are saying, well, the game's more important to Nashville than Winnipeg, I kept saying, but the games in hand would tell you it's more important to Winnipeg than to Nashville, because if Nashville gotten 2 points in regulation, Winnipeg's in deep trouble. That didn't happen, so they avoid being in deep trouble. I'm just saying they would have been in deep trouble. Number 13 on the board, moving up 1 spot from last week, Florida. So the Panthers, they're staying in the hunt. I thought that comeback victory against New Jersey today was huge. That being said, they've had some wins. They've had some losses along the way too. And I do think, if you look at it, I have them above Pittsburgh. I think they can pass Pittsburgh. I do. I think that they can get that playoff spot. And if they do, that could make for some fantastic hockey. If we get Boston and the Islanders in the first round, just as an example, and then we get Carolina and Florida in the first round, yeah, that could be a really fun series too. Not to take anything away from Pittsburgh, but yeah, if Florida has this come from behind, entrance into the playoffs, they could be a tough out. I would say a tougher out as a team that's come out of nowhere to end up in the playoffs. Well, not really out of nowhere, but come out of that clump of teams to end up in the playoffs. I think they're more dangerous that way than they were last year when they won the President's Trophy. Absolutely. All right, number 12, and moving up one spot from last week as well. So this is kind of funny. So I do the video on Dallas. Dallas was 10th on the board at the time I did the video on Dallas a few days ago. Then they lose to Vancouver. They lose to Edmonton. Today's game against Calgary, there was some sloppiness in there. There were posts that kept Calgary from winning that in regulation. Posts aren't shots on net. I'm just saying, if Calgary was a little more accurate there, this could have been a lot uglier. So for Dallas, they end up back in 12th. So they dropped 2 spots from where they were at their peak this week, and we end up with them just moving up 1 spot overall. And so it's a long road trip, and we'll see when they get home from the road trip how things go. They're still first in their division. I know where they are in the overall West. I'm aware. It's just when you're watching game in and game out, I have my concerns when it comes to Dallas. I still have those. Number 11, also moving up 1 spot from last week, Tampa Bay. So Tampa, the wins over New Jersey definitely helped. Then they win this one over Montreal. Could have been a trap game. Almost was. They were down 3-2 going into the third, of course. And then great third period by Tampa. But they stopped the bleeding. They had dropped from 10th to 12th last week. This week they moved back up to 11th. They seem to have stemmed the tide, for lack of a better term. I should have used the reverse retro puck if I want to talk about the tide, because you got the waves and all that. But at any rate, for Tampa Bay, they're just outside the top 10 right now. This upcoming week, we'll see. There could be some major upheaval in this coming week on the power rankings board. I'm just throwing that out there because, again, there's some teams I need to talk about. Number 10 on the board, also moving up 1 spot from last week, Edmonton. The Oilers are back in the top 10, and they've done it through McDavid having 1 billion points, Draisaitl with 500 million points. Ekholm's had 75 points in 3 games since joining the Oilers. It's not that, but it feels like that. Ekholm has just fit in absolutely perfectly. Things are going really well for the Oilers, and they're still in the hunt for first in the division. They absolutely are. They could end up, if they keep rolling the way they've been rolling lately, they could end up being first in that division. So they move back into the top 10, and this is where things get tough for me, because I looked at this week, and a lot of teams above Edmonton had worse weeks than Edmonton. But I felt like if I had a dramatic move where, let's say, Edmonton moves up to second, that just wouldn't look right. So there are some teams that are on notice. I'm going to take notes of where teams are this week and the records and everything, and then we'll see if there's some dramatic movement next week. Number 9, dropping 1 spot from last week, Colorado. So Colorado's back out of the top row. They've been playing well, but a team passed them. And this is the thing. Teams will pass each other. So for Colorado, they're still in the hunt for first in the Central. That race should go to the last week of the season between Dallas, Colorado, and Minnesota. They passed Minnesota today as well. So Minnesota has this 14-game point streak. That comes to an end, and bam, you're third in the division. That's how tough it is right now. The teams that are at the top are putting up quite the point total. So we may end up with a lot of teams having 100 points again. It looked like as recently as a month ago, we may not have very many that reach 100 points, but maybe that does happen. And so Colorado, rounding into form, which should scare everybody. Number 8, moving up 1 spot from last week. Moving into the top row, the New York Rangers. The Rangers had a good week too, and again, this is where things get a little bit murky. Full disclosure on this, because again, when I was looking at this tonight, I went over it, and I was like, I'm gonna leave these where they are, and then we'll investigate and do the whole CSI X-Files, however you want to look at it from here the rest of this coming week. I may even do videos for members and patrons where I go over this and give more of a behind-the-scenes look at, okay, so here's where everybody is and here's how I feel about it. Because I do obsess on this on a daily basis. So the Rangers are 8th. They're playing very well. That win tonight over Pittsburgh, that is a statement game. Getting Shesterkin his second shutout of the season. Yeah, the Rangers are looking good right now. Number 7, dropping 1 spot from last week, Minnesota. Yep, Yep, that's right. They lose in regulation for the first time in 15 games, and I dropped them one spot on the board. And really, it's a matter of a team having passed them that I feel like is playing really, really well, really well right now as well. And at this time of the year, it gets tougher to do this because Minnesota's been playing really well. Again, I could have moved Minnesota and this other team up to, say, 2 or 3, but I don't know how sustainable that is. There are teams right now that I don't think are playing quite up to their level, but I think there's still that chance they turn that around. And so Minnesota ends up 7th this week, 6th on the board. And up one spot from last week, the LA Kings. So the Kings lose in a shootout tonight in a game that was absolutely stolen from them. Demko in thief mode. And when he's playing like he was tonight, good luck. Demko can be one of the better goaltenders in the NHL. Had a really rough go of it. I don't think he was 100% to start the season. And I think the way he's played since returning from injury is kind of proof of that. So for the Kings, I didn't penalize them for that loss tonight at all. I think they're playing really well. Firing in all cylinders, all 4 lines. Their defense is solid. Korpisalo has been very good. One note from the Abbotsford game tonight was that the Abbotsford Canucks outscored the Ontario Reign, and the save percentage was awful for the Ontario goaltender. And I asked Yvonne, who was at the game, I said, "It's not Peterson, is it?" And she's like, "Yep." I was like, oh no. Because, I just thought, it's probably Cal Peterson. It is. So, there's that. But hey, Abbotsford won the game, so that's good news. Abbotsford's actually had a really good year, so at some point I'm going to need to talk about it. At any rate, we're in the NHL Power Rankings, and we're going to go to number 5. Dropping one spot from last week, Carolina. Carolina's tough. Carolina, they have that comeback victory against Philly. So there's that. Coming into that game, they were 5-5 in their last 10. And this is one of those things that I try to keep in mind when I'm doing power rankings. Some of these teams at the top have rough games. And I think part of it is the teams they're playing against are more motivated. They're more motivated, they have more to play for, and they're more desperate. And this is something I've been talking about in recap videos recently as well. And I think that's some of what's going on with Carolina. I do have concerns about their goal scoring, but it looked okay tonight against Philly. And I want to keep in mind, too, Philadelphia defensively has had really good numbers. So if a team lights up Philadelphia a little bit, that is impressive, because Philadelphia in general has been pretty good defensively. All right, number 4, dropping 2 spots from last week, New Jersey. So for the Devils, they did beat the Canes early in the week. Then they have the setbacks against Tampa Bay, which caused them to drop down. Then they had the 2-0 lead against Florida, and they lost that. So it was a rough week for New Jersey, but I didn't bump them down further than 4th. And again, this could change next week. If New Jersey has another rough week, don't be surprised if they end up down as far as, say, 9th. So for people who've complained, and I saw one last week about, things don't change on here, this could really change next week. Because then we're 3 weeks away from the playoffs. Who's actually playing the best going into the playoffs right now? And so, there could be some big movement. I just don't like doing that when you have that consideration of, and this is where, too, when people say, well, strength of schedule, okay, well, who are they playing against that's really strong? Are those teams going to be as motivated as, say, Calgary, as, say, Nashville? Teams that are below the playoff line. Will those teams that have 100 points already be as motivated? And I think that is a question worth asking. Number 3, moving up 2 spots from last week. Sure, their fan base will be surprised, but it's Toronto. The Toronto Maple Leafs moving up to 3rd. I thought they had a decent week. Not a perfect week, but nobody had a perfect week. And that's part of what's kind of been driving me nuts this week, is that it felt like, okay, this team has to be playing the best right now. Nope. I had New Jersey. I was ready to put New Jersey at 1st. And after New Jersey beat Carolina, I was like, okay, I think New Jersey's playing the best hockey in the league right now. And then they didn't win anything the rest of the week. So they end up down at 4th. Toronto ends up at 3rd. And I think Toronto's playing well. I think that it's legit that I have Toronto 8 spots ahead of Tampa, but the playoffs are a totally different beast. That's why I don't do power rankings for the playoffs. We are 3 weeks away from the power rankings being done. until the summer. So, and I'm kind of excited about having Saturday nights where I'm not up till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. As much as I enjoy doing videos for all you fine people on the internet, it will be nice to be able to get a good night's sleep on a Saturday night, which is a few weeks from now. Number 2 on the board, moving up 1 spot from last week, and this is the one that I really went over in my head. So Vegas gets annihilated by Calgary, right? So Calgary moves up, but Vegas moves up. Vegas moves up. Outside of that Calgary game, I thought they played well this week. And so I'm looking at the Calgary game and I'm saying I'm going to allow for a mulligan on that. But again, I'm going to keep an eye on them this week. And if that Calgary game, it turns out, is a precursor for some really bad games from them, then yeah, they're going to drop way down. But we don't have a team in, I would say, these 4 that I think is playing the best hockey they have this season. And so Vegas ends up second on the board. And we'll see how things churn in the coming week. Because number 1 on the board, as boring as it is, Boston ends up back at number 1. Boston ends up back at number 1. They were not in the number 1 spot after losing to Chicago. But then they go in and they beat Minnesota at home. They beat Winnipeg as well. And they've started to play like Boston again. They've started to play like they are the best team in the league again. So Boston ends up number 1 on the board. And again, we'll see this coming week. And this is where, and I want to explain this again. For the Rangers, I mean, I could have moved the Rangers up to, say, 3rd. But again, are the Rangers playing that well, or is Pittsburgh playing that badly? This week's going to tell us, because they're done with Pittsburgh. And so, again, I consider this week's power rankings more in flux than it might appear, because teams moved around a lot, and then by the time we reach Saturday, a lot of them have moved back. And I do, and I'm looking at the tiny board that I use to track the power rankings during the week, and all day I've been sort of agonizing over where all the teams are. So there you go. I know that explanation won't necessarily make people out there all that happy, but these are the power rankings for this week. I'm confident in them, as confident as I can be, because some of these teams are going to have bad games because they're against teams that are more motivated than they are, and that makes it tough to track them. But let me know your thoughts, as always, in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.